Right, so and this is where the majority of you are struggling, in accepting your facade. You're not accepting that you have one, not accepting what it does, not accepting how bad it is, also not accepting that you've got certain attitudes that keep you in a place of not accepting it. So what are these attitudes? Now, we've already listed them in their first talk, right? In the first group, some of these attitudes. So what do? There's some of the attitudes are we deny, excuse, minimize, justify, blame, self or others. Self or others. We punish self or others. We judge self or others. Usually both, right? And so forth. We've got techniques. They are the techniques that we introduced you to in the first group that we're using to deny the state of our facade. Now, these techniques are techniques we're using to... We're not now accepting the facade. These are the techniques we're using to reject the facade, to reject the concept that we even have one. Do you get that? Yeah. So we're going to have to do something about reversing these attitudes, aren't we? If we're going to accept the facade, we have to reverse these attitudes. The only problem is every one of these attitudes are emotions. And what is the pain saying? Don't feel emotions. So this is a bit tricky now, isn't it? The pain saying don't feel emotions. You've got to avoid emotions. The very emotions that we use to reject our facade are emotions we have to reverse in order to accept our facade. And yet the pain is saying don't feel any emotion. Now, can you feel why it's so hard to accept your facade? Because you have to process through many of these emotions to accept your facade. And if you don't, you won't accept it. And if you don't accept it, you can't progress to the next step, which is to begin deconstructing it. So many of you are in this state where you're not accepting your facade. You're rejecting your facade. You believe you don't have one, or not much of one. You don't believe the situation is as bad as it really is. In fact, for many of you, you don't think there's a situation at all. It's like normal. It's like, they call it, you're cruising at a level, not changing. It's normal for you to have the facade's normal. So rejecting it is important to us. Yep. So Laura?
This might sound a bit silly, but the whole talk that we're doing, accepting the facade, are we talking like we accept it and we shouldn't, or
no, I'm saying you should accept your facade, and most of you are completely rejecting you even have one.
Because I know that God can't love our facade, because we learned that in the assistance group, that God can't love the facade. So, but there's another quality that we give ourselves in our facade that's not love but acceptance. Is that what?
Well, no, love accepts the truth, does it not?
Love accepts
If you love yourself, you would accept the truth, would you not?
Yes.
So an act of love of self is to accept the facade, because you're actually part of love of self is accepting the truth about yourself. And if you have a facade, you need to accept the truth about it.
So acceptance means like just acknowledging that it's there?
Not only acknowledging it's there, but it's there. Stop punishing yourself for it. Stop blaming others or yourself for it. It's just there. It's how it is right now. Sure, there's a whole heap of choices in the past you could have made that might have made it better, but you didn't, right? So stop punishing yourself for the fact that you didn't make a choice 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Stop punishing yourself that, you've got all of these issues. The state of the facade is the way it is. Stop blaming yourself or other people for it. Stop minimising it, excusing it, justifying it. Stop lying about it. Stop all of these things. An act of love is to actually stop all of those things and start going, I have it. There it is, again and again and again. There I go again. My facade is just this amazing monster of a creation. And it's inside of me, and there I go again in it, instead of judging it.
Right, so God doesn't love it, but God has a feeling of just recognising it's the truth and understands why it's there.
No, see, you're mixing up my words in the first group as well. God is only capable of loving our real self. But God still loves what you can create. He designed you to create whatever you want to create. So he marvels at the fact that you created a facade. And he does. He goes, I'm such a wonderful creator giving this person free will. Now they can create this monster of their own. Isn't this amazing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought you meant he can't love it, like the rejection.
He has compassion for it. He has compassion for how it was created. Remember yesterday afternoon we looked about how it's created. Many of you had to create it. See, this is what you're forgetting. You had to create it to survive. The world we live in as a child required the creation of your facade. You had to create it. God knows that. God's not silly. God knows all the pressures you were under to create it, all the pressure that was put on you. God knows all of the damage that was done to you as a child in order to create it. God knows all these things. God's not there going, I've got to punish her for the fact that when she was a little girl, this is what she was taught to do. God has compassion for the fact that you were taught to do it, and then eventually, because you were taught to do it, you eventually taught yourself to do it more. God knows that. So God knows the state of your facade better than you do right at this moment. And God has compassion for it. You don't have compassion for it. You judge it. You criticise it. Right? And it's stopping you from progressing. You've got to learn to stop hurting yourself about it. It is how it is. It's been created by a whole series of very bad events, all of which now, if you become aware, you'll want to try to reverse for the next generation, right? But it is how it is. It's like coming to see myself in this moment here in my facade. I've got to see all the warts. That's what I've got to do. I've got to see all the things I do that are out of harmony with love, all driven by this facade. Even blaming myself, punishing myself, blaming others, punishing others, justifying to myself, justifying to others, minimising for myself, minimising to others, excusing myself, excusing others. All of those actions are taken so that I can avoid accepting my facade. So that I can avoid just going, no, the way it really is really bad. And it's in me. It's my monster that I've created, and I've been taught to create it. I was helped to create it. I was shown how to create it by other people who had already created it. And now I'm living in it. You see? Yeah? Can you feel that? You feel you need compassion for it. Compassion for it. Not attacking it. It protected you as a child from death, most probably. At least from some very serious psychological damage. It protected you from, but it doesn't serve you now. You're adults. It can change. It doesn't serve you. Does that make sense? So the real state of it is to just let yourself feel what it feels like. To have all this terrible creation inside of oneself that other people taught you to create and that you then embellished the creation of and used my will. I used my will to create it. And I have to acknowledge that this is what I've done and get to the point where I can accept that this is what I've done and have compassion for the fact that it's what I've done and that I was almost forced or manipulated into doing. I was definitely manipulated and many times forced into doing it by the environment and society in which I grew up. Does that make sense, Laura? Yeah. And it's such an important concept to get. This attitude towards this facade needs to be that attitude. So whenever I talk to the facade in you, what I get from you is, stay away from me, you evil man, right? That's what I get from you, right? But a person who's actually in the state of accepting their facade doesn't do that. They go, yeah, I can see that's what I'm doing, and also why I'm doing it, because I understand how that got created. I understand from yesterday afternoon, our discussion about the creation of the facade, how it got created, this terrible process that all of you went through, and every single child on this planet, unfortunately at the moment, usually goes through in order to create this monster of varying sizes. So you could think of it as a landscape where, some of them have got a little crouchy monster, other ones have got a big scary monster, other ones have got a little sneaky monster. And these are all the facade, right? They're all the facade. And your type of facade was assisted in its growth and actually trained in its growth from your childhood onwards by the society in which you grew up at the time. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Have some compassion for it. It's a sad thing, isn't it, now that it exists? It's a sad thing it exists. We look at the state of our facade and we go, wow, what a mess. What a mess. And then we go, I've got to try and make out it's not a mess. When we're far better off just going, what a mess. What a mess. Do you see it? The attitude needs to change. Yeah? And already some of you are starting to feel some emotion about changing that, which is good. Yeah? So Tara, if we come on this side. Hand up, Tara. So, okay.
Is compassion something that you have to develop as well, or is it a quality from God?
Most of you are very harsh on yourselves. See, when I start talking about your facade, what happens inside of you is you connect to this harsh judgment that you have of your own facade when I start talking about your facade, and all that does is cause a rejection of what I'm talking about with you. I don't feel harsh about your facade.
But if we didn't have compassionate parents, we weren't feeling compassion from them, and therefore we weren't that wasn't modelled to us.
Yeah, you try deconstructing your facade and you'll soon find that you don't have compassionate parents, because they helped you create it. They don't want you to destroy it.
Well, I can feel even in myself as a parent, when something's happened with one of the kids, that I haven't got compassion, and I'm like, why haven't I got compassion?
Yeah, because we were not taught to have. We were taught to do all these things, justify it, judge it, blame others, minimise. All these tools that we use are go-to tools. Techniques, we've called them in our first group. They're techniques we use to reject the facade, to reject that we even have one. We just keep rejecting. But the problem is that it causes us to enter this state where we're not compassionate with ourselves here. We're not being compassionate with ourselves. We're saying to ourselves, you bad boy or girl, you've created this terrible, terrible monster. What a bad person you are. When actually, you had no choice to create it. You before you even knew how to make a decision about creating it, you were creating it because you were forced to. So stop getting on your case about it and just accept that you have it.
It seems, when you say it that way, that we're only really doing that to go back to the protecting ourselves from what we really feel from our parents.
Correct.
Like we don't want to feel the pain.
Correct. So all of these attitudes are exactly what your parents have done to suppress their own facade, of course. And that's what they've done to teach you to do the same. But I'm saying you've got to change this. The only way you can change it is by feeling emotions So you notice, here I am again blaming my facade. Here I am blaming someone else for it. Here I am blaming my parents for it. But let's face it, they had parents who they could blame, and they had parents who they can blame, and it just could go on for eons, couldn't it, that way? We're better off just going, this is how it is. What am I going to do about it? Can you see that? Mm-hmm. But most of us are not going, this is how it is, because we're too busy trying to deny how it is. And if we deny how it is, we can't do anything about it. Right? So to accept my facade, you can see I need to do a number of things. And you notice in the section, I've got a section called What to Accept About My Facade. I've firstly got to accept the state of my facade, that it is a mess. And it causes me all sorts of problems, all sorts of hardship in my life, causes destruction of relationships, it causes me to go from relationship here to relationship there, causes all sorts of fragmentation of love-based relationships, and therefore fragmentation of my happiness. I get hurt through the process. And the state of my facade is a real mess, and I need to accept the mess it is. That's number one. Great, thanks.
Is there layers of facade? Like, I'm doing all this sort of stuff. I'm getting a bit of a feeling for my facade and stuff. But now I'm just starting to realise that I think I've manufactured a lot of my facade,
of course,
just to help me avoid my real facade.
Of course. Yeah, so remember I've said to you, you put layers on top of it, and you also do switches to the side as well with regard to facade. Many of us have more than one. In fact, most of us have at least 7 different facades. Because
like the facade that I've been becoming aware of, I've just realised it's an adult facade. And what's underneath that is a child facade.
That's right, yeah, which was created even before you were aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, most of us have at least 7, because you're facade with your parents, facade with your society in normal society, a facade when you go to school. You know, many of you have been to school 12 years or whatever, so there was facade generated in that school, in those school life. Then you enter relationships, so you've got a facade in partner-based relationships. You've got a facade for specific friendships, and often one for female friends and one for male friends. Right? And you usually also have a facade at work. So there's a few, right? Minimum usually of 7.
But like there's ones underneath that as well.
Of course there are. Yeah. Yeah. So we've got to just see it's a huge mess, right? It is a huge mess. There's no doubt that it's a huge mess. Like many of you have been living in the huge mess ever since I've known you, and you've found it very hard and confusing and hurtful, and the more I talk about it, the more you want to run away, and like it is a big problem. And to be frank with you, there's a lot of problems that result from it as well, which we'll talk about in the group feedback about, you know, what we do when we're in this denial of the facade in comparison to what we do when we're accepting it. And the reality is that almost everybody who's heard divine truth hasn't got through their facade yet. They just haven't. Very few people, in fact, have. Okay, if we go to Amber, thank you.
I think a way that you could like look at your soul is opening up a door to a room and you're like, whoa, I remember this room. And you're like, well, what the heck's going on here? Like, it's so messy and there's, you know, rubbish all over the ground. There's boxes everywhere. All the curtains are closed. There's mold growing on the walls.
Yep.
There's like bats hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
Dust all over the carpet.
Yeah.
And you're like, someone's had a party
there's
here.
Old food and there's old things and there's rotting.
Yeah, rotten things. And you're like,
rotting corpses there. They're like, go on.
Like, millions of people have had a party in this room and I wasn't invited. Like, where am I meant to start with all this mess? And you clean up like a tiny bit of the mess. And then you look over and there's like more and more mess. But I guess by the ends of it, you get like a really nice clean room.
Well, the key you can see is to stop creating new ones.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? So that's important, right? But you can't stop creating new ones if you can't even accept your old ones, because your old ones generate your new ones. Right? So you can see that accepting your facade is the key part.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So the other thing we need to talk about here is that we need to accept that God's view of our facade varies greatly from our own. We need to accept that the truth about my avoidance techniques prevent me from seeing my facade. So there's a whole series of things that I really need to accept. Now, I've got those in the list under the heading What to Accept About My Facade in your outline, which we don't have the time to go through, but you can ask questions about later. So here we are. This is the state of our facade. The most important thing I want to get through to you is this. You need to begin having compassion for yourself here. And I don't observe too many of you yet in a compassionate state about it. Now, I'm not suggesting you justify it. I'm just suggesting you have compassion for it. I'm suggesting that we start addressing the emotions we have about it, about the facade. So instead of deny, accept. Instead of excusing, go, no, this is how it is, be honest about it. Instead of minimising, so, no, it's bigger than what I thought. Instead of justifying it, go, no, it's unjustifiable really. It doesn't matter what happened in my past. Instead of blaming myself for it, I go, no, I can't blame myself for it. Most of it I was taught to do. How can I blame myself now? I do it now, but most of it I was taught to do. I didn't know this before. You can't change something you don't know. So why are you blaming yourself? And then stop blaming others for it too, like your parents or someone like that. What's the point of blaming them? They don't know about it either. They didn't know they were doing it to you in most cases. They weren't aware, and they didn't know it was done to them either. So you can't really blame them for it. Stop punishing yourself for the fact that you have one, self-attacking yourself, pitying yourself. Right? It is how it is. It's the result of humanity walking away from God's love and truth. It is how it is. We need to accept how it is. You see? Compassion for how it is. We need to get to the point where you can see every wart and pimple, every room in a mess, right, that's inside of you, and look at it without having a meltdown of anger and rage towards yourself or others about it. It is how it is. Accepting how it is. That's what I mean by accepting my facade. Yeah. Now, can you see it's a pretty powerful place to accept your facade? No change is possible without it. And this is the reason why many of you have struggled with change. Because you haven't got to the point of accepting yet. You've been in the place of judging it all the time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Phoebe, you wanted to... Oh, no, David, sorry, you wanted to ask?
What happens when you felt very proud of your facade, especially as an adult?
Yeah.
Is it anything different in there to...
Well, there's obviously things to work through there as well, because there's nothing to be proud of, is it? It's a big mess. Nothing.
Yeah, I've felt very proud about the adult facade that I was able to create the decisions that I could make and go,
yeah, most of us...
I can not be like that and I can actually go and be
yeah,
like
most
that.
of us can remember the times in our life, and usually it's in our teenage years, that where we chose, we might have been like an introvert, and then we decided, no, I'm going to be an extrovert. And we can remember the exact time we made the choice and decision from that moment on. That's what I'm going to be. And off you go being that. Many times you can do that. And particularly when you're in your teenage years, many of us have done that, where we've created the facade in that location for whatever reasons. We were even sick of looking at our previous one. Right, at our previous facade, the ones that our parents created, and we got sick of that one. We just rebel against that, kick that out the door and replace it with a new one. Many of us have done that, and we need to honour the fact we've done that, but we need to get to the point where we're no longer proud of it. We just accept it for what it is. We did it because we were sick of the old one. You can imagine why, can't you? Like, you can have compassion for yourself about why you'd be sick of the facade your parents helped you create and you decided to create one of your own. I think it's fine. I don't think the facade's fine. I think the fact that you did it is fine. In fact, for most of you, you had to do it in order to have any sense of survivability in your life. Yeah. It's really critical, actually. If we go to Alwyn on this side.
When you're saying it is what it is, it's actually the truth. So it's actually recognising a truth.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's also being humble.
Yeah.
Can you see the 4 tools? Like, we've got to have faith that before we can change something, we have to first see it. We've got to love the truth about this. So we've got to get to the stage where we love seeing what we've done. We love seeing the creation that we created and that we were helped to create by others. When we love seeing it because we love the truth. And we've got to see this fact that we need to take action. We need to actually do something about it if we're going to change. And the very first thing we need to do about it is to accept it. Emotionally accept it. Stop rejecting it. Stop using these tools to reject it and start releasing these tools, these emotions you have about it, so that you can accept your facade. It's an emotional process you're going to have to go through about your facade. You're not going to change your attitude to your facade unless you release some of these emotions you have about it. So, excusing is all about excusing truth, minimising truth, justifying truth. Truth will help you with that. Denial is all about completely shutting down any feelings whatsoever about it. That's about emotion. Blame is all about emotion towards others, emotion towards yourself. Punishing is all about emotions towards others or yourself. Judging is all about emotions towards others yourself. These are emotions that are going to have to be addressed to get to the stage where you can actually go, this is my facade. And I can handle the fact that I've got it. And I can handle the fact of how it got there. I honour the fact that it got there for reasons initially beyond my control. And now under my control. And I can accept that. And once I can accept that and have compassion for that, I can change it. Anna, thanks.
So AJ, we have to work through the temptation to judge, to punish, to blame, to excuse. We have to work through those as emotions, that temptation, that compulsion inside us, hey?
Correct. These are addictions used to cover over the facade, so we need to work through them as emotions. We need to deconstruct our emotions about our facade. So we'll talk about that in the next few days. Yeah, in the next section. But that's spot on. You can see it's an emotional process. All of these processes are always emotional because they're all feelings we have towards something. And the only way to change a feeling we have towards something is by feeling the feeling that we have towards it. And then to see whether that feeling is actually, we feel the feeling, we release the feeling, and then we no longer have the feeling because we've released it. So for example, when I was dealing with my facade, I used to get so self-punishing. And I've explained this to you. I used to hit myself. Sometimes I used to punch myself, full-on punch myself. And one occasion I knocked myself clean out. That's how hard I punched myself. Right? Punishing myself for my facade. Now I had to stop that. I had to see that that was an unloving act towards myself. I had to work through my emotional reason why I was doing that. And in my case, I was doing that because if I did it to myself, then other people wouldn't do it to me. So I had to work through that emotion of being afraid of what other people would do to me. Right? Once I worked through that, that stopped happening. I stopped judging it so much. But that took me quite a few years to work through that. This desire to just harm oneself, rather than face up to how it is with compassion. Do you see? Requires an emotional process from you. It's going to require an emotional process. Yep. Many of you have not yet begun that emotional process. You've begun to identify your facade in terms of what you're doing, with help usually from others and the law of attraction and so forth. You have some identification of it, but you still heavily punish yourself for it. You really get into yourself about it. See, a person who's accepted their facade, by the time they've finished accepting their facade, they no longer punish themselves or others for it. They no longer pity themselves or others for it. They no longer blame themselves or others for it. They no longer excuse it. They no longer justify it. They no longer do any of those things. Do you see? It's very important that we understand that. And I'm going over time here, but I think it's important that we understand what we need to do. Is that all right? Yep. So Kerry, on this side, I'm happy to answer. We'll get into the questions in a minute. We'll have a break very shortly.
So AJ, once we get to accepting the facade, then we can get into the terror.
Yeah, you're going to have to first accept that you have the facade before you're going to accept what actually causes it, you see?
Yep.
So it's going to be hard to feel this emotion until you've gone through a bit of this at least. For me, this process took me I'm just thinking whether that's true even. What I find is that I went through a period of maybe 3 years where I started to face up to the fact of what my life situation really was like. And it meant coming to terms with the fact about my marriage, about my religion, about my life, about what I was choosing to do, about my relationship with my boys, everything. Other people might call it a breakdown, but for me it was just like coming to terms with the truth about all of these things. After I did that for nearly 3 years, I got into that. And I went through that in 3 and a bit months for me. We'll talk about a bit of that later maybe if you ask questions about it. But went through that in 3 months, but it took 3 or so years for me to get to accept it and stop really punishing myself. I still had tendencies after feeling the fear to punish myself about my facade, but eventually I've stopped those tendencies as well and started just allowing the pain I felt. Does that make sense?
So you can't really skip feeling all those emotions to accepting the facade and get to terror.
All these emotions are stopping you from accepting your facade.
Yeah.
So the only way to accept your facade is to stop having these emotions. But how do you stop having an emotion that's in you? The only way you can do it is by feeling the emotion and releasing it without acting upon it.
Yeah.
It's the only thing you can do.
Yep.
Yep. Kane
Thank
behind.
you.
Yep.
So the global emotional refusal of pain and terror, so that's just one emotion really, is it? And when you get rid of that, you can still go up into the facade?
Once you feel this, it's very, very hard for you to live in a facade after then.
Yep.
Very hard. In fact, it requires a lot of effort after that. It's not driven by terror anymore.
Yep.
So to actually live in a facade after then, you have to really choose it, and you can feel yourself choosing it then. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a lot more obvious what's going on once you've felt this. But you're not going to get to feel this. You're not going to get to feel the global refusal of pain, right, until you at least deal with some emotions about what you do towards your facade. You know, whether you feel good about it or bad about it. And most of us feel like when we're confronted with the reality of our facade, Kanan, it's like we feel bad about it. But we have to get to the stage where we no longer feel bad about it and actually can accept it emotionally. So, and accept it in the sense of feel compassion for ourselves, the fact that it got there. And that's why we went through yesterday's talk with you in the afternoon, how it got created. Once you see how it got created, you can go, wow, like how much choice did I really have here to create it? I had to create it really. Right? So now I'm left with what I created to survive my own childhood, but now I can undo that. Now I can do something about that.
Yep. Thank you.
Good question. Okay, so let's have a break now because we've covered this accepting my facade information. If you come back at 12:30, and I'm running about 20 minutes late, so if you come back at 12:30, we'll have a Q&A on the subject.